Hey everyone, whose caller using number 1? Hello?
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon. So if you call,
I'm not sure if I'm muted or not. No. Let me see. Yeah.
Hi everyone, we're going to get started in a few minutes. If you called in, could you just let me know who you are so I can take attendance, please? So I've got 2 people or 3 people that looks like they've called in.
Chief Deputy John Lubrandt and Lieutenant Michael Gerasi from the Schenectady Sheriff's Office.
6.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Chief Deputy Lubrandt, is Gerasi in the room with you? I still have 2 other people showing they called in.
I currently have myself and Lieutenant Mike Gerasi here. I'm not sure if the undersheriff has called in, and possibly Superintendent Ron Walsh also.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's 2 o'clock. We are going to get started. We have a lot to cover today, so I'd like to get right into it. Another announcement that we're taking attendance today, so if you are a call-in user, just identify yourself so that Carissa can take your name down. What's being shared right now is our timeline that we would like to use moving forward from here to April 1st. Today we're going to go over the review of recommendations that the department is putting forward. And if we don't get through them, I'd like to keep tomorrow and Friday open as possible dates that we can meet again to continue our conversations regarding them. I think that at the bare minimum, we need to have these recommendations finalized by the end of business Friday and sent out to the public. Ideally, to have them presented to the public both on social media and traditional media by Saturday morning, so that Saturday and Sunday and most of Monday the public has an opportunity to review them in anticipation of the public hearing on the 8th. At that point, and this is entirely up to the city council, once we present them to the city council, the timeline that we're working on, and again, this is up to them, is that we will continue to meet as a steering committee on the 10th to fine tune anything that may come out of the public hearing that we may want to add. And we will be in discussions with the city council for their Monday, March 15th Public Safety Committee meeting. And well, the expectation and the hope is that the reforms are acceptable and that it makes it out of committee. This is again up to the city council, it might not, but should it make it out of committee on Monday the 15th, then the expectation is that the vote will be on the 22nd. That leaves one Monday or at least basically leaves the week between the 22nd and the 29th. Should there be an issue that needs to be delayed to get this before the city council for a vote before the executive order deadline of April 1st. So I'll pause briefly for anybody that has questions on this timeline. And if not, we were going to get right into, I will present the recommendations and I'd like to go through each of them. There are 20 of them, and give a brief summary. I'm not going to read the report, but give a brief summary of where we are at with these and why we are recommending them.
Chief, thanks for presenting the timeline. Could I ask at this point if we could just solidify tomorrow and the next day? Because I do think we'll more than likely need to meet. We can see where we get through today. But if you want to do it at the end, we could do it at the end too, I guess. That's fine.
I'm sorry, Jengis. We had to raise our volume level. Are you asking that we pick a time right now?
Yeah, but it's okay if we are disciplined enough that maybe pick that time at the end of the meeting. Let's do that too. But I do think, just given the bulk of what we have to discuss in the recommendations, that I'm glad to see that you put those 2 dates in there for tomorrow and the next day for the task force to meet.
So how about we do this? I'll put it out there that we'll say 2:00, same time, Thursday and Friday. And by the end of the meeting, we'll have a discussion about that, whether that works or whether that doesn't work. That work?
Oh, okay, I'll tell you, I was hoping we could have done it closer to 11, but that's just me. Other folks have to talk, but let's not get into it now. Let's get into it at the end.
Okay, yeah, we are open. The steering committee, we recognize that is everybody here is volunteering. So we will work around everybody's schedule, whatever works best. So we will get right into our recommendations.
If I might make a comment, please. I sent out various things, and I just want to voice at the beginning, I really believe that getting the recommendations a day and a half before discussing them is just not adequate. And I understand all the pressures people are under, but it's just simply not adequate. And I would ask that, I just want to voice that at the beginning. And if there's a move to just move quickly, even by Friday, it makes the situation, the recommendations not credible. Some of them require more thought and work than the time we have. And I guess I would ask the city council to consider postponing the hearing to give more time for consideration and for people who are here with various groups to take these back to various groups. And I just want to voice that up front. And I believe that this process appears to be very rushed.
Anybody else have any comments they'd like to make? Okay. I am going to start off by going over recommendation number 1. This is under the Roman numeral number 1, where as a department, we recognize that our use of force, data collection, is an opportunity for us to improve. We are very proud of our current data collection as it relates to use of force, but we recognize that many times we do have to collect a little bit more data. So we have the updated form that we shared with everybody, and that was shared a few meetings ago. I think it's been out there for at least a month, and we shared it with the entire steering committee. We have not gotten any feedback on that, so we are recommended that we adopt the new response to resistant report. In that report, there are additional data metrics that will help us to better analyze force, when we're using it, and who we're using it on. The second recommendation is that we go ahead and we turn that response to resistance report into an electronic, a digitized format so that officers can fill it out on a software platform we recently purchased, and that will give us the ability to self-analyze. Officers will be able to pull it up themselves and see, self-analyze the force use that they've used in the last month, 3 months, 6 months. Gives platoon commanders and supervisors the ability to do that, as well as our Office of Professional Standards. And again, these new data metrics are embedded within it. That gives us the ability to look at and analyze who force is being used on, where it's being used, and help guide us in our training recommendations moving forward.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So could you please tell me the approximate date, at least, that the form was sent out?
Give me,
Because I'd like to go back and be able to take a look at that.
yeah, Councilwoman Porterfield, I can just go
Yes.
up in my emails. Give me 1 second.
All right. If you want to put it in the chat, that's fine. So if the chief wants to continue, that's fine. I just would like that information, but I don't want to hold up the process.
Do we
Today.
have that online too?
Okay, so pertaining to recommendation Roman numeral 1, Chief, the key question that I have there for discussion is there any form of the use of force in response to resistance that is going to be made available to the public? Or is there any plan for that? Either it's I think the question is hopefully good enough, but if we can discuss it some more.
Are you asking if the form will be made public, or the analysis of the use of force, will that be made public?
So, I mean, let's talk about it. Which one? I mean, I was thinking analysis, but I don't know what was the first item you mentioned?
I was just asking if the form was going to be provided.
No. So it's a separate question from what Councilwoman Porterfield had. I think hers was just a logistic one and trying to find the email or present it. Here I'm talking about specifically items number Roman numeral 1.1 and 1.2. Sure.
So yes, the answer is yes. That's the idea behind digitizing the use of form and gathering these additional data metrics. We recognize, and we had a use of force report that was conducted and shared at the beginning of this collaborative, and I recognize that there were certain gaps in that report, and I sent it back to our analyst, and it was very time consuming and labor intensive to try to close those gaps and try to find certain information. So there's many times that you can't have a box to check for every situation. So there's an other box that has to be checked with, and the handwritten in what the other was. And by having the digitized format, it gives us a better idea, or gives the officers more options to choose the correct use of force. And then once we have that digitized, it is our intentions to be able to run reports, ones that the public wants to see, and put them on our open platform. That's something that we'll be talking about at the end of the recommendations from a transparency perspective.
Okay.
Under our
Perfectly. So, okay. So I guess if you have it at the end is fine. I was just thinking that we need to memorialize somewhere, especially in what goes to the city council officially, that there is going to be a communication to the public periodically of these reports.
Yeah, I would have to say that, for this one, for recommendations 1 and 2, that I'm going to have to push that to the last recommendation, because that is contingent on having that platform, having that website developed with a portal that will support that.
All right. I mean, maybe we could. I understand what you've said in terms of putting it to the last item and it being contingent on the new system that you want to put in place. But I think even as of today, even though there's gaps, et cetera, like you've mentioned, right, there is there is use of force information that potentially could be communicated out. Right. So really what I'm just going at is that whatever level of software capability you have in pulling the reports, really coming after the public transparency part of that piece, right? And so I do hope that, you know, you do get the new software system to make that a more complete internal assessment, and also make the reports that can go out to the public more complete. But I'm not sure if you have to wait for that system to do that, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, certainly anything can be done, but it becomes more labor intensive. That's kind of where I'm going with, is that it took our analysts days to complete an evaluation of use of force on our current format, which is handwritten paper forms, where the data has to be taken by one analyst and put into a computer and then analyzed, and then there's gaps that are there, and by presenting them to the public's going to maybe have more questions, so that cause more concern than benefit. And that once we adopt the proper format for collecting this data, and we also simultaneously have this portal ready, and it's close. It's an Esri portal that we can talk about that when we get to the transparency stage. Or is Matt Douglas on the call? Anybody know?
I don't believe so. No.
That's fine, Chief. We can pick it up then. I mean, I think I conveyed the main concern I want, and I think you've heard it on this one. So hopefully it is something that is conducive to create these reports in the future. And
Yeah, and
be public.
And just to kind of put a little bow on the top of it, because I understand exactly what you're saying. The vision and the goal is to have an open platform portal that gives every report that the public wants to see. The public will have access to it, from Part 1 crimes mapped out in the city, and we may even have use of force mapped out throughout the city, showing where force is used, where it isn't, and then you can click onto it and you can see, you know, the type of force used, and you'd be able to see the reports that we're generating based on zip codes and areas, and that's where we're going with this. It's just that we're not there yet.
If I might add something to this, this recommendation by use of force seems to be the one that would be the area to include any reduction or changes in use of force or procedures. One of the 13 demands from all of us was about reducing some of the kind of holds that are used. I think you responded one day to say certain ones are used, but I don't see any other recommendation where it would respond to any change or lessening in some of the use of force that was recommended by all of us.
They are all of those changes are listed before the recommendations. The reason that they're not recommendations is that they've already been implemented, every single one of them. On page 6, it outlines most of them. Starts with page 5, page 6.
I think you should tell them we revised our policy 3 times in 2020, our use of force policy, based upon law changes and accreditation and governor's executive orders. So most, those changes I believe are all in there.
Any other questions about use of force recommendation? I'm going to move on to the recommendations. Number 3. Recommendation number 3.
Can I just stop? There's nothing under number 2. There'll be no.
Yeah. Thanks.
I was just going to get to that. Recommendation number 3 covers harm reduction initiatives and community health initiatives. Recommendation 3 is a response to that. We recognize that the two are closely related to each other. For those that don't understand the difference, harm reduction initiatives are focused on using the negative consequences of using drugs, while community health initiatives are more focused on mental health, mental health issues, adults at risk, homelessness. And our recommendation is to train officers as community engagement officers, and they will have specialized training to respond to these calls for service, and they will know who the proper person is to call if they were to arrive on the scene of somebody who's in crisis for mental health or whether it's homelessness. Currently, Lieutenant Mascherone and Sergeant Mannix are doing this job right now, and we are proposing that we significantly increase the number of officers that are trained to do this. Now, you can't always have somebody who's not a police officer be responsible to respond to somebody who's in crisis. We are the police department, and we are handling these calls for service for the reason that we are 24/7, 365, and we have to have somebody on our staff that's trained to deal with them. If we have the ability to, we will get somebody there who is not a police officer, who is better suited to handle it. That is the goal. But at a minimum, if there's nobody available, if we cannot get Northern Rivers crisis team out there, if we can't get one of our partners that deal with homelessness to assist us, we have to have the right people there with the right training. So that's the recommendation, is that we invest in the police officers for that specialized training so that we can better serve the community and build up our partnership within it. Lieutenant Mascherone is on the call now. Lieutenant, is there anything you wanted to add to that concept?
No, I think you covered most of it. I think the important piece is the understanding that there's a recognition of the fact that we are not the best trained in many of these areas, and there are professional agencies out there that really should be dealing with it. And oftentimes we're maybe the first on the scene, and the quicker we can make that transition to somebody who really is equipped to handle some of these issues, then the better off it will be. The better it is for the individual and the police department as well. Sometimes just from, I guess, most of my experience would be in substance use and running the Schenectady Cares program. So I do understand kind of the intricacies of trying to enter somebody into a treatment facility and some of the hoops that you have to jump through. So although it's not hard, it's a unique skill set that not all of us get. And the vast majority of the calls that we go to on a daily basis or just our basic human interaction, and these are human need calls. They're not the most severe calls that we probably spend more of our training on. We spend a lot of training on a lot of different areas for again, calls that we're only going to be going on a small percentage of the time, whereas these are the majority of the calls that we're going to be going to. So the more training that we can get our officers, and the quicker we can, or the better equipped they can be to hand these off to a professional in our community, the better off I think we'll be.
And I think it's important that we keep in mind that we've already, and I know Director Spahn's on the phone call, we've already started sending callers that hit the UCC, the Unified Communication Center, to these partners for help if we can. We're talking about the calls where that can't be diverted that way, and we're talking about the calls where we are the last line, that we want to have the right people there that are trained to handle them, and this is something that we could do. We could ramp up pretty quickly as far as putting the training together, get officers trained, Building up a team, of course. We have to look at our staffing needs, and we have a proposal in without a number attached to it because we have to actually see if there's additional officers we would need. But at a minimum, we could get started with this sooner than later.
Okay. So just a couple of things, Chief. I'm glad you brought up the UCC thing, and maybe Director Spahn can just comment. I think we would have already started doing this based on just the time that's passed in Schenectady. Is that true? Have some calls been diverted already, or no? I guess that's a question for you, Director Spahn, if you're on.
He's on, right? Yeah, he's on.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, I see his name, but
I do remember seeing a report. I'm sorry. I do remember seeing a report that came out recently that had a number attached to it of how many calls have been diverted through that route. So I don't know the exact number without going back to it, but it did appear that it's already underway.
Yeah, they have been. I don't see him on here anymore, but they have. I can tell you that they have been diverting calls, and yeah, we're certainly happy with the progress we're making on that. I think it's a little too soon to really evaluate success or a failure on it, but it's definitely working so far.
I just want to jump in and ask a couple questions. So I think this is a great idea, personally. I worry about the language around, not necessarily the language, but the idea that there might not be someone else. There could always be someone else if there was funding to prioritize institutions and organizations trained in trauma responses and harm reduction and so on and so forth. And I think there's a national focus on where to divert funds from and replace them into community-based sources. And I think that this would be a fantastic time to talk about what defunding and refunding would look like. And I know that that's an iffy topic for a lot of people on this call. There have been public discussions about it where people have talked about how they hate the idea of defunding the police without understanding that it's not to take away money from people, from good people. It's to give money where it could be better fit. You know what I'm saying? So I think the language around, in the case that we would be the last call, like the last option, there is an opportunity for you to never be the last option because you have, as you and other officers on the call have said, we're not the best suited for this. But on the other side of that, if you're gonna implement these trainings and stuff, I personally feel like it's a great idea. I also feel like every single officer should be trained in harm reduction tactics. There should be no question about, in the event that there is an officer who has not been trained and they're the last option to call, or however it might work, there should be no lapse, no gaps in any of that. If everyone is on board with harm reduction, everyone should be trained in harm reduction, no matter how long it takes. The same way everyone should be trained in anti-racism and da 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 da, and how to not kill people and all this other stuff. I think it's a great idea, but I think it's only going to be a productive idea if it takes hold of the great and huge and vast opportunity in front of it. Harm reduction is something that, like you said, is if not the biggest, one of the biggest issues in Schenectady in regards to what the police department responds to. That's what you said. I think that taking some time, like we discussed last week, it's not all about what you can do. It's also about what you advocate for outside of your position. Advocating for more funding to community response teams and organizations and institutions who can do this work, so you never have to feel like you're the last option and then you have to scramble to train officers to do something that someone else can do, and it'll take weight off the burden of the police department. You know what I'm saying? All the work that you would have to do. While that is true, it can also coexist with the truth that every officer should already be trained in harm reduction, and this is a great initiative to begin that process. There should be no gaps in any of that. And I think that if you can't personally defund and refund into community-based situations, you should advocate for that, because this is a perfect opportunity. This is really what I'm here to see. I'm really excited about this harm reduction idea, but like only if it's really going to take hold in the way that best suits the community. If every officer is trained in it and we are all advocating, including the police department, for sending funds over from places they don't need to, it doesn't need to be in, into organizations and community leaders, and training for other people who can do that job and carry that weight better, so that there's no burden that's too heavy on anybody. Because that's what defunding the police is about, whether anybody wants to hear that or not. That's what it's about. It's about best suiting everybody in the community, including the police department, by taking weight off of something where and putting it where it could be better fit. So I think this is a great idea, but those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah, if I could just tell you, Michaela, that I don't disagree with anything that you said, except for the defund part of the police. And the reason I say that is they were never funded, the police were never funded to handle these issues in the first place. So what happened was, over time, as these issues presented themselves, nobody else handled them except for the police. So the police just kind of accepted the role to handle these without ever being funded for it. And by having to do that, and keep in mind that here in the Schenectady Police Department, under Lieutenant Masheron, we started doing these things 3 years ago. We started connecting with the community, doing these things. It was hard to see because it was on such a small level, and we've ramped ourselves up to where it's a little bit more visible. But everything that you said, Michaela, I agree with. And in a perfect environment with the right funding, it's exactly where we would want to be. Is if a police officer never has to go out into the community to handle a situation that has anything to do with harm reduction or community health initiatives, that's the ideal scenario. One thing I neglected to say is that we'd be looking to have these community engagement officers dressed down, maybe in a Class C uniform, something that's little less intimidating, maybe a polo shirt, tactical pants. Still be identifiable as a police officer, but just not be as intimidating looking, knowing that the person that they're going to is likely in crisis. So that's one of the things that we're thinking about along the lines here. But I think that's an important point for everybody to understand, is that we are advocating for the county public health to maybe get a more active role in doing this, building up these partnerships. We can't say enough about Northern Rivers and their help in this.
Yeah. So Chief, on that last point, and I'm glad. No, I'm sorry. I was speaking, but in case someone else wants to speak, I'll be quiet for a minute.
I just wanted to add to what Michaela had to say. I want to second it. The police department has a very difficult role, and I'm very sympathetic with that, having worked with a number of officers over the years. And about the things that have been laid upon you, I understand that fully. However, it's a win-win situation to have someone else entirely do it rather than an officer, no matter how they're uniformed. And I would recommend that this alternative recommendation be that a certain percent, could be a small percent of the department's budget, be contracted to Northern Rivers or other such groups to provide such services. The dilemma is, if you keep adding staff, you keep adding staff. And other folks will not step up to the plate. It's very important to have the win-win, where it's taken off your plate and put on the plate of those who can serve it. And I don't use that language that she was using, but it is the time for community care teams to come forth, and the resources that are available in the police budget. I know that's controversial. With all due respect, I disagree with you, Chief, on it. But it's important that we make a step in that direction to say to the community we want to steer resources to where they can go to those who can best deal with it, take it off the officer's plate, do the training, which is important for each officer, but not to set up a separate 2 officers, because then they become 4, they become 6. How many more do we go to? And then the community as a whole says, well, they'll take care of it because they have officers. It's only if the funds are diverted and to show there can be a step made that will make progress in our community.
Councilwoman Porterfield had a hand up in the chat as well.
But let me just say that Genghis was ahead because he was starting to speak. So I'll certainly let him go first, and then I can make my comment.
No. You go ahead.
Okay.
You go ahead, Councilwoman Porterfield.
Thank you. So, I'd like to support some of what's being said already in terms of how the funding is allocated, and that I think we should look at our police budget and allocate funds to organizations who do this for a living. I don't know how beneficial, or I think we're asking a lot of our police department, as we say, and we need you to learn this and we need you to learn that. I think that's more of an ask. So when the chief was speaking, he said if they're available in terms of those organizations, I think we should make it a point to have the funding there so that is part of what they do, that it is their responsibility. So they will be there, and we don't have to hope that they'll be there, and hope that they're available. So I think it's important that we do look at reallocating some of that funding to make sure to these organizations, as Reverend Grigsby has said. And the other part of it is, this is really a question. Is harm reduction going to be something that's taught in the Zone 5 training, something that new recruits get immediately? And then obviously folks who are already, officers who are currently there will also get. But is that something that's going to be included in as new officers are brought on board? And the other thing I want to say in terms of how this is showing up in this report, there's like nothing under 2, and I'm finding that really puzzling, since this is really generating so much conversation that I feel like it needs to have something in there, so people have place to refer to it. It doesn't make sense to me that it has absolutely nothing there when there's all this conversation and all the things that we're talking about today that specifically refer to harm reduction. So those are my comments. Thank you.
In just I'll give a quick answer on that. We can correct that in the outline. On page 8 under harm reduction, it does say under recommendation, the proposed changes to our harm reduction approach can be viewed following the section on community health. We can add that to the outline so it's less confusing.
All right, and I just so I can say, I'm sorry, Genghis, I have some other thoughts, so I'll just I'll submit those in writing.
Okay, I'll be quiet, Councilman Porterfield. I mean, and so just for a complete sideline pause, right? This is what I think we're going to get after. We're going to get to 3 o'clock. I'm trying to give the fairest discussion on each of these things and what I want to say on them, right? But hopefully we can lock in some meetings tomorrow. But anyway, Councilman, you go ahead before I go.
Oh no, that was it. That was my last fit. That was it. I was turning it over to you. Okay. I'm finished.
So I do agree that obviously, Chief, I think something needs to be there underneath Roman numeral 2. But in a consensus attempt for the voices that were all heard, including yours, Chief, is it worthwhile for us to put a line item of recommending to the City Council that the funding, if we look at 2 extremes, right, as a filter or a flowchart process, what direct respond and the UCC are doing sits at the head of that, right, when they get the call. And then the frontline boots on the ground is officers who must and should be trained as you've requested, right? We agree. So should we make a recommendation in writing to the City Council as part of these recommendations, a sub-bullet under this topic, that the City Council seeks to fund or finds ways to fund other organizations that are more suited for the different type of crises and harm that the public would be in? I mean, we've all said the words in here that we're not disagreeing with it. My thing is, let's just put it in the writing of the recommendations.
I would have no problem with adding that the City Council should either come up with funding for that or ask the county or state to come up with the funding for that. I would caution from taking any funding away from the police department, because you have to understand that these officers that are trained in this category are also trained police officers. So there's an efficiency in having them on the street. While they are available to handle calls like this, if they're not handling calls like this, they can handle other calls. You take funding away, instead of adding officers, we're going to be subtracting officers, and we're going to have less officers to keep the community safe. So I would support asking the council to find funding rather than take funding.
Right. And I mean, and we've got council members on, and look, I know exactly where we're coming from on this, right? And in the process of us as a task force, we've identified that as let's say we've identified as a recommendation. And at the end of the day, I think whenever that budgeting process happens, you know, there is going to be a healthy debate, right, as to where money's going to come from. My personal anticipation is I'd like to see funding be found, right, from whatever avenues are there to find it, rather than taking money away from the training of officers. But at least as a task force member right now, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't include a recommendation like that, right? At least we memorialize it.
Reverend
I'm not
Gardner.
sure there's a consensus position here, because I focused in on just not adding staffing to the police department. I would want to, whatever funding is found to contract is great, but I'm opposed to adding staffing to do it at the police department.
I am too.
Can I just add something, Chief?
Yeah.
I just gotta add something from a budget perspective. Everybody has to know, in last year's budget, we took about a $1.8 million hit on our budget. We lost 9 officers, I believe 7 or 8 civilians. So we reduced our staffing a lot in the past year. So I guess that's why we're a little bit more safeguarded against this. And we also don't know what we're talking about as costs for this harm reduction. We're all for it, as everybody's saying. Just from a budget perspective, we don't even know what something like what we're looking at would cost. And then from there, I think we need to back into where we can get the funding from, not to get ahead of ourselves, but just to add my 2 cents from a budget perspective.
Yeah, and I just think it's important to note too, I had Lieutenant McLaughlin run some numbers. In 2020, we handled 18,257 calls for mental health just in the city of Schenectady alone.
Is the mayor not on this call? I want to hear what the mayor feels about this, because in 2020, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there an 8% salary increase, 8 or 9% salary increase towards the police department, which obviously doesn't touch on funding, but I do want to hear what the mayor has to say about this as a public official, who has the power, if not to change things, to advocate for them in other offices. I'm not sure why we're not hearing that point of view, especially if we don't have a consensus on how to word what we all seem to agree on, just from different perspectives. So I am interested to hear what the mayor's office has to say about that.
Hi, Michaela. Unfortunately, the mayor had a couple different conflicts going on scheduling wise today. So in the event that we do meet tomorrow, which it looks like we will, he'll be on and definitely add to the conversation.
Okay,
I
thank
also,
you.
of course, and I just want to point out Reverend Gardner also had her hand up.
Thanks. I would, when it comes to the harm reduction piece, I would invite our council members who are on this call to consider looking at some of the documentation and changes that the City of Rochester City Council and police force have implemented. I'm not familiar with all the details, but I know that they have made some changes specific to harm reduction this past year that might be an interesting city to be able to look at and to be able to learn from. I'm sorry that I didn't have this question at the time, but I was trying to reread the pieces that had to do with use of force. Thank you for those items. And I was just rereading, because in my first read through, and then to reading again, one of my questions is, what is, I appreciate these recommendations, but what happens for an officer who uses force that has been deemed to be inappropriate? I see that there will be a report made to DCJS, but I don't see that there's, I'm not familiar with what the accountability line is there. And so if the only thing that happens when someone uses a chokehold is that there's a report filed, I'm just wondering if there's further recommendations that should get made or could get made in this area. And I may have missed something.
Reverend, if somebody uses force that's not in compliance with our policy, it's a policy violation. And that you would have to refer to our discipline policy to see see the flow of where that would go. But just to break it down for you, when it's determined that force was used that's inappropriate, it would be reviewed by a supervisor and referred to our Office of Professional Standards. An internal affairs investigation would begin, and then that would end up coming to me for review. And if it's confirmed, then discipline would be handed down.
Thank you.
I want to jump in on that as well. This brings up the idea of I'm just, we're coming towards the end of this process, unfortunately, and I really want to just be as blunt as possible. This brings up the idea and the reality of the blue wall of silence. And while the chief of police has spoken out against that, which I do appreciate, I'm not really seeing any confirmation, personally, professionally, or anything in these recommendations or the language used around them that that really puts a full stop on the possibility or contingency of the blue wall of silence being something that's brought up. I understand what it's like to have loyalty to those that you work with and those who are looking to uphold the same things as you. But so when we're talking about accountability, how do we make for sure that there's no turning the other way, or there's no corruption happening? Because that's not something that can ever 100% be stopped. But as has been brought up before, and this is a little bit to the side, but that is a big thing that I think we need to discuss, how to put in a recommendation that curbs the blue wall of silence. But also, as has been brought up before, there should be in these recommendations changes to the CPRB. And it seems that it has not been included, but regardless, the city council needs to move forward independently on it. Just as they did in Albany with how they passed the local law J that granted subpoena and disciplinary powers to the CPRB. And we should be working to echo that in Schenectady, as specifically as a new law in Schenectady. And we should also be advocating for those other people in elected offices to be advocating for the same thing. So CPRB aside, though, within the police department, how are we making sure that the person who files the report, and then the person who reads the report, and then the person who goes over that, and then the disciplinary stuff, and then it landing on the chief's table, like, how are we making sure that there's no bias in that? What recommendation or what format are we using to curb corruption? Because these recommendations are great for what they are, but you cannot be sure that there is no internal bias. You can't be sure that one day someone's going to be like, well, he's my friend, so I'm just going to let it rock, or whatever the case may be, because we don't want to lose more officers or whatever it is. And what does the discipline actually look like if we could really break that down? Because at the end of the day, use of force is an act where someone is purposely or even unintentionally, but at the end of the day still does it, hurting another human being regardless of the reason. And if we're talking about harm reduction, I understand that there's some logistical value to the separation of what harm reduction is and what use of force is, but reducing harm is essentially backing humanity. Everyone has humanity, and I need to understand how I can fully get behind these recommendations if there is nothing for sure, making sure that none of this is corrupt moving forward.
What are you doing?
So let me just jump right on the tail end of what Michaela said. And look, I'm just letting everyone know this is going to be a consistent theme for me about memorializing in the recommendations. The ABLE EPIC program that I think enables every officer, right? I mean, Lieutenant Mash, can speak to this better than me, right? Should that be something that we make a commitment to in our recommendations?
I mean, we're jumping
I would
around
say
on
yes.
our recommendations here. I mean, we're all over the place. We're talking about.
Hang on, Chief. I'm sorry. I know we ended up
That's a
going one
separate
step back,
recommendation
but
that we had a whole topic to talk about, so we can talk about it now. I think we're losing focus, but to give you an answer,
is this specific thing?
Yeah, just to give you an answer is that as far as ABLE goes, we see that more as a long-term goal of ours to be able to adopt that. While on the short-term end, we are building up the premises of ABLE internally, so we can actually deploy ABLE without actually joining the program. The hardest thing about joining the program right now is all of the training requirements that come to being a part of the program. But the individual tenants of ABLE, we are able to start deploying them, focusing on officer wellness, really reinforcing the duty to intercede. We have that in our policy, duty to intercede. To jump into Kayla's point of how do you know that the officers aren't deploying bias when using force? I don't know how we'll ever know. There could be somebody on this panel right now that's biased, and I will never know it. How do we manage it? How do we police ourselves? We have body cameras. We have street cameras. We have probably the best group of supervisors that this department has ever had. We are having strong leadership, and we are constantly talking about these things. So I'm confident enough that should something happen, there's not going to be that blue wall of silence. Probably for at least the last 4 group of recruits that come into this police department, I'm the first person that they speak to. And one of the things I tell to them is that there is no such thing as the blue wall of silence. I tell them all that if you see something happen, it's your duty, even on day 1, to say something, and that most of the time, the people that try to use that blue wall of silence are the ones that end up taking the fall. It's called collateral damage. So I've had those conversations with our officers on day 1, and it's the culture that we've changed here. That's how we're moving forward, Michaela. But is any organization perfect? Raise your hand if the organization you work for is perfect.
Yeah, Chief. I understand that. There's just 2 things. So first of all, procedurally, are we talking about this out of turn? Is there another recommendation later on that this is better suited for? I mean specifically here the ABLE EPIC type institutionalization? Whether you do it with them or with the university, with Georgetown Law or not.
Yeah. We had ABLE under officer wellness for recommendation number 12.
Okay, so I'll wait till then and bring it back, right? But the key, but I can foreshadow that the key thing is going to be having it, memorialized in the recommendation, so that what makes that long-term vision of yours, what could make that happen sooner, right?
Right.
And the only other thing I want to mention is that one of my headsets in this task force is to think about what the police department looks like how many ever years from now, right? When you're no longer the chief, right? When there's a new chief, which necessarily happens by retirement or anything else, right? How do we ensure that as individuals change, the institution maintains enough of enough of a role model for the future leaders, right? I hope that makes sense to you.
Sorry, Chief, I just want to jump in. We're about 10 minutes out till 3:00, just so to keep us on schedule.
Yeah. To answer your question, Jengis, is that we adopted core values, and one of those core values is legacy, and that's something that we talk about often here. Is that it's the legacy that we came into this job on, the hard work that officers ahead of us did, and the legacy that we enjoy because of them, and the legacy that we are going to pass on to those that are following us. And that when we retire from here, when we move on from this job, we want to be able to be proud to say we were Schenectady police officers. We want the public to look at us and be proud that we are Schenectady police officers. So it's something that we talk about regularly, and I truly believe that officers care about. They care about that legacy. They don't want to. They want to walk out of the front of this building when they retire and have the community out here applauding them and saying thank you to them, rather than walking out the back door and never coming back to this building again. That's the culture we're working on building here, and I believe it started before me, and I think we're gaining good traction on that. And any other question on the harm reduction, community health initiatives?
My question is about whether or not I'm appreciating that we're talking about the recommendations, is there a plan for discussing other parts of the report? Or if we have questions or concerns about other aspects of the report that are not the specific recommendations, what is the best way for us to share those questions or concerns?
I guess what I would say is that if the question about the report is related to the topic that the recommendation falls under, that'd be the time to ask it.
Okay, and if it isn't, would it be best to submit something in writing to the whole group?
Either way, you could either ask the question here or you could submit the question to the whole group.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Just checking on process. Thank you.
So back on harm reduction, Chief, I think if you could just display back the note that you took, it might, maybe we hit close to the consensus point we thought we were on. You did make a note there, but I didn't get to read it carefully as to.
Cengiz, do you mean up at the outline?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a note that was written in there, but you had scrolled away before I got a chance to see it. So, okay. So there is something there done in the community health that will articulate somehow.
I wrote down for community health initiatives to request the council find funding for these efforts.
So, all right, look, I'm not going to worry about the amount of time we need to spend. Reverend Grigsby sent something in the chat. What? I mean, Reverend Grigsby, you can speak up, I guess, right? I mean,
He's muted.
Okay. I mean, it's the point he raised before about. I guess where he's coming from is about police staffing relative to community health. Look, we've got other members of the task force here, right? There have only been a few voices. What are other people thinking on this? I personally agree that police officers need to be trained, as the original recommendation asked for. Right. I also believe that something needs to exist in the middle between the UCC and the police officer as a last resort. Right.
Yeah, and I mean, I've already spoken, but I definitely agree with that. And I'm really still not 100% clear on what the addition where it says add summary of recommendations. And it seems like we can't get past these the first three. Let me also say that when you scroll down to talk about ABLE, I just noticed the language said should and will consider. I think that it needs stronger language since the recommendations are coming directly from the police department that we will, and that there's a real commitment made to those to doing those things. I've read about ABLE, and I think it would be great to have, but I think that our recommendation says that we will do this, and maybe even spell out a timeline when we'll be able to make it happen.
And my thought, Marion, to add a summary of recommendations coupled with community health initiatives is that trying to find the similarities between harm reduction and community health initiatives, but also recognizing that they're different, but some of the responses are still similar. So just, organizing it in a way where it just doesn't read Roman numeral 2 and then nothing underneath it to remain consistent with the rest of the outline. So that's still trying to be worked out. That was just more of a placeholder at the moment. So that's still just being worked out.
Honestly, I do have to go soon. I agree. There's a two-part aspect to this, as was brought up in the chat, about how this funding should take place. We don't have a consensus on that. But I'm really concerned about what time we will be meeting tomorrow, because obviously we've only gotten through 3 barely. And this is hugely important. And I think we've all taken it so seriously up to this point. I need us to figure out a time to meet tomorrow because I do have class. But I want to make sure that this happens. And I think we all do. So how are we going to figure out what time to meet tomorrow?
Look, if 2 p.m. works for everyone tomorrow, it's going to be impossible for me actually. So, but if everyone else goes and meet, I think that's fine. I don't have to be there. I can make 2 p.m. on Friday work.
What about later tomorrow? 3 or 4 p.m.? No?
No, they're all afternoon tomorrow is bad for me.
What about early?
Michaela, does 11 o'clock in the morning work for you, or are you in class?
I can make that work. I can make 11 work. I can also make the rest of the day work. I have really early morning classes tomorrow, but I'm not sure what everybody else's schedule looks like.
So just as a proposition for efficiency, I mean, 11 o'clock, maybe both days. I'm going to be completely blunt. Those are just slightly better for me. But, I could also drop dead between now and then too, and it wouldn't matter.
Sorry. 11 o'clock tomorrow work for everybody?
I would say yes, and Chief, also, is there the opportunity, if it doesn't work for people and they want to send written comments, are you open to that as well?
Yes, I think that what we should do is 11 o'clock tomorrow. However, anybody that has written comments, whether you will be here tomorrow or not, send them to the collaborative email for Carissa to pull out. And then she will couple them all together and send them out to the group in one PDF. And so that way everybody doesn't get 100 emails in their box. And then we will share those first thing in the morning, so everybody will have them. And then we will tentatively look at locking in 2 p.m. Friday. We got through 3 recommendations today, and we have 20. Let's call it 4 because we kind of talked about it. Yeah, we got through three recommendations. So we might want to keep Friday for a couple hours if possible.
Agree. Are we gonna
I'm thinking.
discuss the peer review that was sent in? Is that gonna be discussed? I think it should.
I think we need to get through the recommendations first before we talk about anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a back and forth on the documents, and also, the Fin Institute did send something out. So I know I need to look at those more carefully.
Okay, I believe it's 3 o'clock. So we don't keep everybody any longer. We will regroup tomorrow at 11 a.m. and continue this starting with number 4, de-escalation.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.
I'll send an invite
Thank
out.
you.
shortly.
Okay. Thanks for accommodating the time change, folks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.